Hi, everybody. Welcome to the IC Topic Chats. Today is April 25th. We are joined today by MJ Pattison. She's from Massachusetts. And MJ, how long have you been coming to the IC Topic Chats? I know it's been 6 months to a year. Has it been more than a year?
It's been a little more than a year. I
Has it?
started I started in coming in probably the summer of 22,
Oh, wow.
I
That's
think.
awesome.
I didn't say much for the first 6 months, but
Well, and so,
I did come.
I'm happy that you're here and I'm happy that you're presenting. And I just want to put a shout out to you, but also to anybody else who's interested. We, we, I do a lot of sessions, of course, but it's always nice when people have a passion or an interest or a pet project that they want to talk about. And so um, it helps kind of give us different perspectives on things. We've certainly talked about networking before, but it's always nice to hear it from other people's perspectives. Um, and anyway, with that, MJ, why don't you take it away, and we'll record this part for the until you're done speaking, and I might have some questions for you at the end, and then we'll stop the recording, and then we'll go into just a broader, kind of more open chat function about networking. How's that?
Sounds great. Okay.
Yep.
So I'm MJ Pattison, and I've been a independent consultant as an evaluator since July of 2022. And I've come to kind of think of my really, I just want to talk about, so there we go. Okay. I've come to sort of think about the evolution of both my career as a program evaluator and more recently as an independent consultant as kind of a rabbit trail. And if you have rabbits in your yard, if you live in a place where rabbits hop around and you watch them for any amount of time, you'll see that they hop in one direction and they eat a little grass, and then they hop in another direction, and then they get startled and run under a shed, and then they come back out the other side of the shed and hop back toward the place where they found food before. Anyway, there's no discernible pattern, but there are lots of rabbits and they are pretty effective at getting what they need. And so I started thinking about sort of this career development as a rabbit trail, networking as a rabbit trail. And the definition is a rabbit trail is when you go somewhere that you didn't intend to go, and the focus goes off script and you find yourself in a new pathway and start exploring that. And the tangents sometimes lead to dead ends. Sometimes they're spirit led or intuitive. You think, gee, I think I'll just go down this path and see where it leads. And sometimes they end up being a roundabout way of getting someplace that you didn't know that you wanted to go. And they're best understood in retrospect. When you look back, you can't really see them looking forward, but when you look back, they have a certain kind of sense to them. And my actual career as a program evaluation specialist is a rabbit trail. And I just want to briefly, as a way of introducing myself, describe my career rabbit trail. I started out in Southern Connecticut. I was ordained as a Presbyterian minister and then married a Presbyterian minister. My first call was in Connecticut, and then we were called together to, let me just put my pointer on here if I can do that. We were called to Rochester, New York, and served a church in the inner city of Rochester, New York for 17 years together, raised our family there, and sent our kids to the Rochester schools. But once they were sort of college age, we were sharing a job, and it occurred to us that a second income would be helpful. And also, I'd always kind of been interested in teaching. So I got certified to teach secondary social studies. And that was the first rabbit trail. I went around and about several different places. I had a number of long-term substitute positions, none of which evolved into a real contract or a career. And then about 3 years into that process, my husband was called on his own to Albany, New York. And so we moved, and I expected that I would continue to try to look for a teaching job, but um, there wasn't a lot of teaching jobs in the early 2000s for second career, first year teachers. There were plenty of teachers. But through a complicated set of serendipitous things, which I won't go into, I ended up being hired by a college professor at the University of Albany who ran a shop called the Evaluation Consortium that basically was a way of funding PhDs at the University of Albany. And she pulled down math science partnership grants and had several of them that were working in city schools. And she needed somebody who could manage those grants. And I could manage things and I knew about city schools. I knew nothing about evaluation. I didn't even know it was a thing. So, but she hired me to manage these grants and one of the perks of this entry-level job was you could take a course a semester at University of Albany. So I did, and I learned about research design, and I learned some very basic things about applied statistics. And then after 2 years, the grants ran out, and I was unemployed again. But those 2 years gave me enough time and enough credits with field placements to have a master's in educational psychology and methodology, which turned out to be interesting to the New York State Department of Health. So they were looking for somebody that had program evaluation experience, which I now did. And again, I knew nothing about the content, and they hired me to be a program evaluation, as a program research specialist for a relatively new obesity prevention program, which evolved into a 13-year career working on nutrition and physical activity interventions in high need communities in New York. So I did that for a wonderful 13 years with wonderful colleagues. And then in 2020, in the middle of um, the pandemic, I retired and we moved to Massachusetts. And Chatham evaluation, the idea of being an independent evaluator had been kind of a pipe dream, sort of like maybe I could do this, but it didn't have any reality to it. It was a file on my computer where I put things that were interesting to me, but it was not anything real. And so for 2 years or so, we settled into Massachusetts and into a new life. And then something happened. And this is the beginning of the rabbit trail. Let me just take off my pointer. So this is my rabbit trail. This is what it looks like without anything filled in, so you can get a sense of how sort of non-linear it is. But the first thing that happened is that I was copied in on an email from a former colleague at the health department who said someone was looking for an evaluator to do a pro bono project for a client outside of the health department. And that turned out to be a literacy project with public librarians. And I thought, I'll do that. I mean, pro bono was perfect because I really didn't know what I could do without a team. They really needed somebody to evaluate a series of educational webinars for public librarians. So I did that and they really liked it. And they really liked having an evaluator and thinking like an evaluator. And so started to write me into small grants. So I had my first client, which meant I could like claim my name. So I went down to the town hall and claimed Chatham Evaluation and hung out my shingle. So that was the first thing. The next thing that happened is once I was making a little money, I rejoined the AEA and the IC topic interest group. I had been member of the AEA off and on throughout, both at UAlbany where I learned about it and then later at the health department. And then I made a LinkedIn profile. Those were the two sort of outreach things I did. And the LinkedIn profile produced almost immediately another evaluator who lived on Cape Cod. And she said, "Oh, I didn't know there were other evaluators on Cape Cod. Let's have coffee." She's retired and isn't actually doing much anymore, but she told me about the Greater Boston Evaluation Network, which I joined, and I'm now on the program committee, which gives me sort of a regular contact with a really interesting group of people who are working on projects there and in my area. So then I also joined about this time, sort of early on, once I was something, the IC topic chat. And that's been, you'll notice the rabbit trail goes back and forth and under the shed over and over again. There are so many things that this group has allowed to happen. So the main thing is a lot of practical professional development for free and some good book recommendations. Lots of partners that you can imagine collaborating with, and that's been fun and fruitful, which you'll see in a minute. And then the annual subcontractor fair was like an opportunity to come up with a 2-minute elevator speech about myself, and that was a good exercise all by itself, and also bore fruit. So the next thing that happened is I learned through the AEA's advertisements that David Fetterman was giving a empowerment evaluation webinar again for free. So I signed up for that. And it turned out that that actually had been sponsored by the Health Foundation of Central Massachusetts, which is in my neck of the woods. And they sent me an email after that because I was signed up for it, saying that they were looking for evaluators for their next round of synergy projects. And I thought, what the heck? And I sent them my resume, and they sent a polite letter back saying, well, actually, we really need PhDs to head these things up. So that should have been a dead end because I'm not going to get a PhD. I have enough education, and but I thought, gosh, there's all these people at the IC topic chat that I could partner with, and there's some that are relatively local or New England people. So I reached out to one of them and asked if I could work for her or we could collaborate and I could under her company. And she agreed, and we repackaged ourselves and sent it back to the Health Foundation, and they said, sure, come ahead and go ahead and apply. So we became one of 10 evaluation shops that applied to work on these synergy grants. The next thing that happened is that the subcontractor fair bore fruit, and I got an hourly subcontractor with another member of this group. I helped her finish up some qualitative work in Rhode Island, and then she wrote me into a multi-year grant in New Hampshire, which she was successful in getting. And so I now have work with her and really enjoy that. So the next thing that happened is I got to move my picture so you can see this. The Health Foundation had something in September of 2023, right? Yeah, called speed dating. That's what they called it. And they basically had 8 projects that had made the semifinal cut and 10 evaluators. And we basically rotated tables and 15-minute rows. And what they said is that half of those groups would be moved on to write a final evaluation, and the evaluators that were matched with those grants would move along too. So lo and behold, we matched with one of the 4 finalists, and that finalist got the grant. So the David Fetterman evaluation dead end has turned into the first multi-year collaboration. So I now have 3 projects, and which is almost enough for me because I really do want to just be a support, not ahead of anything. A couple of minor things to share from the IC Topic Chat group and from Greater Boston. I then joined the not-for-profit Consultants Network, which is not an evaluation group, but it's really an interesting place to be a fly on the wall and just listen to not-for-profit consultants talk to each other. And occasionally, you kind of think about what they're talking about and say, gee, how would I evaluate that? And sometimes have something to contribute to the conversation. And that also led to someone in that group. At some point, I mentioned that I was on Cape Cod and was interested in the not-for-profit world down here. And someone knew about that and suggested that I join the Philanthropy Partners of Cape and the Islands, which I haven't done yet, but I am planning to do as the next step. So, so that's the networking rabbit trail that looked so sort of undirected, and that's what it looks like when it's all filled in. Couple of other things. Here's some books along the rabbit trail. Again, a lot of them from this group. I've read some of them all the way through, but many of them I use just kind of to go back and forth for and get ideas. This isn't all of them, but this was just a sampling, and all of these are definitely worth reading if you're just getting started. And then the other thing that I also did along the rabbit trail was a couple of professional development things. The American Evaluation Association has some e-study groups that cost money. So I waited till I made a little money before I took these. But these were both, I took 2 of them, both really good. One was a introduction to statistics for evaluators, which reminded me that I did know something about statistics, not a lot, but a little. And then an e-study group on focus groups, which I do a fair amount of. And then, of course, the evaluation empowerment webinar. And then the Greater Boston Network has almost monthly professional development, very reasonable and very, very good professional development opportunities. Here's a couple examples of those that I've recently taken. So I just want to show you once more the rabbit trail when it's not filled in, and then the rabbit trail when it is. And then say, that it's your turn. I'd like you to, it'd be really fun to share where your networking rabbit trails have led you, especially if there was a time that a dead end turned into a pathway. And then as I said at the beginning, I didn't even know I wanted to be an evaluator. But, by following sort of the rabbit trail, I found out that there was this whole discipline that I just really like and is really interesting. So a networking that brought you someplace you didn't know you wanted to go, but now you're there and you're glad. So that's my presentation. I think that's done. And
So MJ, let me ask you a question.
okay.
I think that the term, we hear this all the time, accidental evaluator. I think if I asked people to raise their hand, everybody would raise their hand, or most of us would. So don't do that, because then we'll all have to figure out how to
Put
click
our
the
hands
button
down.
on, put our hands down. Anyway, but I know a lot of us identify with that. So this is your story, I think, is your own version of a story that a lot of us have.
Right.
Um, when you think about the rabbit trail, my question for you was, how do you kind of toe the line, or draw the line between just kind of allowing yourself to go in a random in a seemingly random direction, versus sticking to kind of like what we might say is a niche? And I've defined that niche in other sessions about like the idea of doing things that you do well, that you enjoy, and that where there's, some way of generating revenue, or there's income involved with it. So do you feel like it is random, or do you feel like is there like a greater spirit, or kind of like karma leading you in a way, or do you have, is there a level of being principled about it, or is it actually more random?
No, I think there is a level of, I think that figuring out what like I didn't know what I didn't want to do. So I'm in a little bit different place than some of the other people here because I'm retired. So I'm not really looking to be full time or um to make this my full-time work. I'm interested in actually, frankly, most interested in supporting some of the newer, being sort of like somebody that can take the time-consuming stuff off the backs of some of the newer evaluation shops when they need extra help and that kind of stuff. So I think knowing what you want to end up with is good. I didn't want to end up with too much work. I wanted to end up with enough work and with interesting work. I also knew that that there's certain content areas that I don't know enough about. Like I would say I would tend to refer things around STEM, other places. I tend to be more in the other side of the brain kinds of activities. So I think knowing that what you don't know is really helpful, and you don't go down a rabbit trail where you really don't have the skills to but early on, the other thing is this is an early rabbit trail. This is like when you first are getting started and you're trying to figure out your niche. And then I do think there's a little bit of randomness about it. I mean, I think there comes a point where you don't go down every trail because you've got work to do. But when you don't have much work, there's no loss in going down a bunch of places. So this is I think later, we may hear about these later rabbit trails are a little more focused than this one was. This one was pretty random. So
Yeah, can you put up the slide again with your rabbit trail?
with mine, okay, how do
Yeah.
I do that? I
Mhm.
gotta go to previous here. I mean, there
So
are certain things joining the AEA. I mean, and joining LinkedIn. There's certain sort of basic things that you start. Um, um, I actually, after Becky's asked me any questions thing, I did a website with some help from her. So you hear things and then say, well, maybe it's time to try that. I didn't have a website for the first year and a half, but I do now. So
websites. We certainly have a website, and it's a great one, but I know that I did a lousy job with the website for the first 5 or 6 years.
well,
Um,
again, they fit into a rabbit trail.
mhm.
They aren't the thing that'll make or break you anyway. So.
So when I'm looking at this, I see you've got colors and you've got direction. How did you kind of build off of um, each of the previous circles, and how did you feel like they were growing and changing and kind of informing one another?
So I think what I did say I tried not to get ahead of my skis. So the pro bono project was like a gift. That was completely serendipitous. But recognizing what you know and what you don't know, I didn't know enough to say I didn't know what I was really good at or what I'd really enjoy. And that project got me to know what level of support I could give and what things I could do well. Things led, so the pro bono project allowed me to say, yes, I'm an evaluator, which allowed me to name myself. And once I named myself, then I felt like I could put together a profile for AEA or for LinkedIn. So I think that is a progression, sort of the IC topic chat. That was pretty serendipitous. I mean, I rejoined the TIG, and it was one of the things that you could do. I didn't even know about it. So that's again that, and then that led to all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's incredibly connected to, I mean, pretty much everything. I mean, if you look at those sort of spokes and wheels,
Mhm.
this is a pretty important group to my
So,
development.
well, and that's awesome to hear that. And I'm kind of curious because what we have are a lot of folks who join the independent consulting TIG or come to the IC topic chats, and they're trying to put the pieces together. How do I make this thing happen? And so you gave us your description. You gave us your origin stories and how things kind of fell together for you. So I do want to spend some time talking about what it was about that 2023 subcontractor fair, which led to the hourly subcontract, which is now the multi-year hourly subcontract. Can you talk a little bit more about how you approached that, how you connected with people, and along those lines? Because I think that's the thing that a lot of, particularly our newer folks, are trying to figure that out, or some of us who are just trying to connect to that next new project. So talk a little bit more about that experience.
Um, I don't know if Terry's here. Okay. I will. Again, I feel like it was serendipitous. The discipline of coming up with a 2-minute presentation was important. I think the being clear about wanting to subcontract um, on a larger project was important. And I guess the way I present, and I think actually one of the biggest things was the region. I mean, this was somebody, I don't want to out her unless she wants to talk, but she had contracts in New England, and she was in Virginia. So it was helpful to have somebody a little more local. And then after our first project, she wrote me into the second project and it got funded. So that was just lucky. Um, but we work really well together, I think, and I'm able to take pieces of projects that and get them back to her so that she can do the bulk of the work. And it's small for me, but it's really interesting. And there are parts of we have a site visit in May where we'll be together, and there'll be some work out of that. That'll be bigger, some qualitative work, I think. But for the most part, it's like small projects that are pieces of the project that help her move forward. But I think what worked about it was that I was in the right place, that she needed somebody in New England. And also she needed somebody to do some qualitative work, which takes a lot of time. And she was finishing up a project and needed that to have happen. And actually I was supposed to do some site visits for that early project, but they didn't time out right. It was ending in June. So anyway, does that enough about how that happened? It was
Sure. No,
just
I
lucky.
think what you're
Yeah.
saying is is it truly serendipitous? I think it feels serendipitous, but I mean, you did the work. We see your rabbit trail of kind of experiences and background, and then you put yourself out there. And so, in many ways, you prepared for that opportunity to present itself to you. So I think that's
Well,
really
and I
kind of a
didn't put on all
neat
the dead
story.
ends. I mean, there's a lot of, I did send letters out and got crickets a couple times. I mean, there are things that didn't work. I only put the rabbit trail things in that worked out. So you also have to be willing to let things not work out too, and then just let them go and move on to something else. The other thing that happens is things come back months later. Um, I'm in conversation with somebody that I had a virtual coffee with 6 months ago, who's now applying for a grant. I don't know if he'll get it, but if he does, I can be a subcontractor on it. Um, so
So
things
you're
that look
saying,
like dead ends sometimes aren't. They work out later on. So,
so you're
and in
saying you
fact,
need to have a lot of.
the
Go
health
ahead.
department thing took a long time to work out. That was about I would say almost a year before it turned into a real grant. So anyway,
You need to have a lot of patience with some of your connections, is what you're saying.
right. Don't assume a dead end is a dead end.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that, if you've been doing this for a number of years, you find that people you haven't talked to for 3, 4, 5 years look you up out of the blue, and then you get these, hey, I want to work with you, and I've got this big project, and you're like, you can't, how do you predict that stuff? Well, you can't. When we have guest speakers, I like to ask what I call the James Lipton questions. James Lipton, if anybody doesn't know who that is, um, he had a show called Inside the Actor Studio. Maybe it's still on. I haven't seen it in forever, but he would interview this famous person like a Tom Cruise or someone, and then at the end he would ask him a bunch of questions like, "What's your favorite curse word?" I'm not going to ask you that question, MJ, but he had these series of questions, and I always thought it was kind of fun that he had those same questions that he asked of everybody. And so I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and just curious how you would answer them. You've answered some of them already because it's just the nature of the presentation. The first one is, if you had to start this all over again and you didn't have this network of clients and colleagues that you do now, how would you get started? I mean, and you gave us your description of how you did get started, but now knowing what you know, how would you do it if you had to do it all over again?
I don't think I'd change anything because my first incarnation as a Presbyterian minister was also wonderful. I mean, and I also feel like that there are aspects of that have made me a better evaluator. So I don't think, I mean, I don't think there were any real wrong turns. There were dead ends. There were periods of time when I was like unemployed and thought nobody would ever hire me again to do anything, to be a minister, to be a teacher, to be anything. But again, the retrospect is helpful. I guess at one point when I was really frustrated and really discouraged, my sister, who's fairly wise, said, "Well, you're part of God's novel, and you just need to wait till the next chapter." And I felt like saying, "Yeah, why don't you wait for the next chapter when you're unemployed?" But she was right. I mean, the story. There's a passage that, um, if it's, I'm not going to get it right, but in the end it'll be all right, and if it's not all right, it's not the end. It's something, I'm doing it wrong, but that's the gist of it, that things will turn out in the end, and if they aren't turning out, it's not the end, which is a very optimistic way to look at life, but I sort of do look at life that way. So
So you would say embrace the rabbit trail.
I guess I would say that. Yes, it's worked for me.
So the last question, based upon your experiences in this world of independent consulting, is now a good time to start an independent consulting practice?
um I think so. I mean, it feels like there's, I mean, it yes, I think it's a good time to start. I think it's a good time to start it if you feel ready to start it. I think that um, it certainly, there seems to be plenty of interesting work at variety of levels, both pretty simple and pretty small, and pretty large and overwhelming, that needs lots of people to work on it. So, and it's also just really it's a really necessary thing to ask if something is going to work in a world where there's all these possibilities, and to have a systematic way of figuring out if it does work is a real useful thing to society, in my opinion. So yeah, I think it's always a good time to start an evaluation business if you've got the spine for it. So
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for being a presenter with us today. I don't want everybody who's live right now to go away, but anybody who's out there in YouTube land, we'll see you guys at the next session. But I'm going to stop the recording, and we'll go into the broad chat.